panel, which is being held at the Chamber, County Hall, Esk, and we start at 10 o'clock. Before the meeting starts, if we could start by everyone introducing themselves for anyone that's actually watching live on the system. Could we start with everyone that side, please? If you could introduce who you are.
Good morning, I'm at ACC Rhiannon Kirk.
Hi, I'm Sian Curley, the Commissioner's Chief Executive.
Jeff Cuthbert, Police and Crime Commissioner for Gwent.
Larry Thomas, Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner for Gwent.
Darren Garwood-Pask, Commissioner's Chief Finance Officer.
County Councillor Peter Clark, Representative for Monmouthshire.
Peter Nuttall, Co-opted Member.
Jill Howells, Vice Chair and Co-opted Member.
Kath Forbes-Thompson, Lead Officer of the panel.
Councillor John Guy, Chairman of the panel.
Councillor Lisa Winner, Blaenau Gwent.
Councillor Stuart Healy, Blaenau Gwent.
William Roudley, Councillor Newport.
Yeah, Councillor Jason Jordan, Newport City Council.
Councillor Mike Jeremiah, Torvine.
Councillor Tony Eason, Monmouthshire County Council.
Colin Mankafili, Canterbury.
Thank you. Now, if we now move to the agenda, which is item 1, any declarations of interest. I believe that's already been recorded and there's no changes to any declaration of interest. And I just ask, is that correct? Okay, no answer. Number 2, apologies for absence.
We have an apology from Councillor Kirby.
We now move on to approve and sign the following minutes. That's the Gwent Police and Crime Panel meeting held on the 22nd of December. Referring to page 1, this is as to accuracy, page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, 6 and 7. I know that you've all read the minutes, so I've going through there as to the accuracy, but nobody has said any different as to the accuracy. Any matters arising? Page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6, page 7. Can we have a seconder that this is a true record, please?
Move that, Chair.
And a seconder, please. Show of hands. Thank you. We now actually, we've got a change on the agenda. We're going to move to number 6 item on the agenda, which is the Police and Crime Commissioners, Gwent's Budget Requirement and Council Tax Precept Proposal 2018 and 19. That's pages 55 and 98. So we'll deal with that item first.
Thank you very much, Chair. In a moment, I'll call upon Darren, as my Chief Finance Officer, to go through the proposals in as much detail as is necessary, and of course to answer questions that panel members may have prior to you making your decision. Before I do that, can I just again just introduce ACC, Rhiannon Kirk. She's representing the Chief Officer team. We felt that it's useful to have a member of the Chief Officer team. Doesn't always have to be the Chief Constable, although I know he enjoys coming here, and no doubt you enjoy questioning him. But I feel that it's useful to have a Chief Officer here to answer any operational questions that may arise during the course of your discussions, although the primary focus, of course, is to hold myself and my office to account, and also very useful for members of the Chief Officer team to understand the relationship between yourselves and my office and how that works in practice. And for those reasons, I'm very pleased, Chair and Vice Chair, that you've agreed that such things can happen in terms of members of the Chief Officer team. Of course, the Chief Constable is always prepared to come when there is specific requests for his presence. Moving on to this particular budget item, it's perhaps opportune. Yesterday, we released the government released the national crime statistics, which showed that in Gwent, crime, all types of crime, had risen in total by roughly 14%, which is more or less typical of the increase, which is 15% across England and Wales. And in a variety of statements, both I and my colleagues across England and Wales have issued clear statements about the need for greater police resources if we're to handle not just the increase in crime, but also the new emerging threats that are there that will undoubtedly affect policing in the future. And I think that that is a important, opportune background to the discussions that we're about to have in terms of the level of resourcing. We know that in Gwent, when I began, the ratio between central government funding and the local precept was about 70-30. That is narrowing to nearer 60-40 now, and on current trends, we'll be looking at something like 50-50 around about 2022 on current trends, and no doubt Darren will amplify this fact. So it's very important that we recognise that the financial burden is indeed moving towards local council taxpayers as opposed to central government, and that is the reality of the situation facing me and indeed my colleagues across England and Wales. With those opening remarks, Chair, with your permission, I'll now hand over to Darren to go through the detail.
Thank you, Commissioner. Today's report is presented in line with the budget setting timetable. Panel members will be aware that the Commissioner is statutorily bound to present his precept proposal to you by the 1st of February in each financial year. You've all hopefully had time to digest the report, but I'll introduce the report along the sort of 9 variables that I always discuss around setting the precept, and the 9 variables I discussed at the December meeting, those being the governance for the process, the context of policing in Gwent, funding, expenditure, efficiencies, the wider economy, external influences, financial risks and opportunities, and performance. And where something has changed between the December briefing and today's report and presentation, I'll bring that to light and also note the impact. So the way the report is structured, all those 9 variables or themes are interwoven within it, so you hopefully recognise some of the points I'm going to make reflecting the narrative within the report. So without further ado, let's sort of chat around governance in terms of due diligence. You recall that the Chief Officer team submit the bid and oversee the whole budget setting process to ensure that it reflects the true demands of policing in Gwent. The executive team of the Commissioner then scrutinised that bid at great length, and we had a series of meetings with the Chief Officer team where they presented their findings and their bid and request for resources to tackle the emergent trends and the new and hidden crime types. Joint Audit Committee provide an independent assurance around the robustness of the budget setting process, and they've been part of this journey and concluded in December that they were satisfied that it was a robust process that had been undertaken. I tap into national colleagues. There's 43 of me across the country in what's called PACS, the Police and Crime Commissioners Treasury Society, and we use that network to confirm knowledge, share assumptions, etc. And I also do that in a Welsh context with the Welsh Police Finance Resources Group, which is represented by the 4 CFOs in Commissioner's Office, 4 CFOs in the Chief Constable's Office, plus Wales Audit Office, Welsh Local Government Association, etc. We have a PCP finance group, which I've briefed in the build-up, who will scrutinise and support the panel in the wider deliberations. We have the Police and Crime panel, who also receive the budget briefings and have the powers to provide recommendations on the precept and also have the power to veto. A key part of the governance process is the public engagement and consultation, and this is probably the first change to the briefing that I gave you in December. At the conclusion of the public consultation, we had 609 responses. 603 of those responses were Gwent residents, so we had 6 who were not resident in Gwent who felt obliged to comment on our precept survey. A statistically robust survey would have needed 600 responses. We had 603 in Gwent. And that was to provide me being 95% confident that the answers I received would be at a margin of error of plus or minus 4%. So I was confident that for the first time in a number of years, we had a robust sample that I could correlate the findings to the real desires of the public of Gwent. We asked 3 simple questions. Would you support a 3.99% precept increase, a 4.99, or a 5.99? And members of the public were allowed to answer all 3 questions if they wished. 68% of respondents supported a 3.99% increase in precept. 54.6% of those respondents supported a 4.99% lift in precept, and 51.8% of those respondents supported a 5.99% in precept. That was a very important kind of metric for us in terms of taking this piece of work forward. And the final piece of governance is I am a statutory officer and I'm held to account for my actions and my recommendations, and I need to do 2 things at this time of the year. I need to make a statutory statement around the robustness of the budget setting process and the estimates contained, and the sufficiency of reserves. And as of today, I am okay to sign both of those things off. So that's the first sort of variable. The next one's around context. We're about a £130 million business. We are 83% staff costs. The Commissioner has already highlighted that in 10-11, when austerity sort of started, we were 70% funded by government grant and 30% by precept. As of the 17-18 financial year, government grant 59, precept 41. Next year, reflecting the proposal we're talking about today, it goes to 58-42. And by 22-23, it'll be about 50-50 if the current austerity measures continue around the loss of government grant and the impact of the funding formula. The context at the macro level, comprehensive spending review, the last one was 2015, and the proposal moving forward was flat cash government settlements on the expectation that local commissioners maximise their local precept opportunities. It's moved slightly with this provisional settlement, but that's the underlying mood music from government. There's an expectation to maintain policing services, commissioners maximise precept opportunities. And the key thing around context is the changing world. You will recall the presentation that the Chief Constable gave in December, and paragraphs 47 to 48 in my report, around the changing types of demand that police are facing, the emergent crime types, the hidden work they do around the vulnerability programme, mental health, etc., etc. Moving to funding, we've experienced 27% cash cuts in government funding since 2010-11 up to 17-18. When you build in the effect of pay awards, inflation, it's in reality a 40% cut in funding. Government grant moving forward, they said it's 0% cut in 18-19, so next financial year we'll have exactly the same grant as we had this year. So it doesn't pay for inflation, pay awards, tackling new demand and investing into areas, and maintaining, importantly, the backstory we've got in investment up to this point. You'll recall the precept conversation last year and the year before that. And we're seeing those fruits coming through with 320 new police officers coming to Gwent in the last 2 years, all because of the precept investment. The investment needs to go forward along efficiencies and the precept, because we always aim that any future deficit is a combination of precept increases and significant efficiency, which I'll touch on later. In 1920, the Minister for Policing also aimed to give us a bit of stability around financial planning rather than this one-year model. So although he provisionally said it's 0% next year, the final settlement won't be able to later this month, he's also indicated it could be a 0% cut, or the same funding for 17-18 in 1920 in that financial year. But it's heavily caveated that there needs to be clear progress against agreed milestones on productivity and efficiency. So it's no way a done deal at this point in time. We need to continue the pressure on the efficiency programme, and then when the Minister sits back and sees that at the national level, will he determine what the 1920 settlement will be. A key area of funding, again, is not just the size of the pie that is of policing, but the slice of that pie that the Commission ultimately has. And we've talked long and hard, and it's in the paper, around the funding formula, changes to the funding formula. That could see not only our slice of policing pie getting smaller each year, or the entire pie getting smaller each year, but that slice that the Commissioner could be £6 million less by 2021, 22, 23, transitioned over those years. A key area of concern. On the capital side, so we get capital grant off Home Office, and it's 60% less nowadays than it was 3 years ago. And you can appreciate that the only way you can pay for capital, if your capital grant isn't being sustained, is through revenue, through borrowing, or through use of reserves that all impact on the revenue account. And to put that into context, we get £449,000 of capital grant, and our fleet replacement programme on an annual basis is about 1.5 million. So we get enough capital grant to replace only a third of our fleet every year. So it doesn't take into account ICT investment, estate investment, etc. The key change around the funding from the December briefing to now is around the precept increase. I had 3.99% articulated throughout the MTFP moving forward, which was the baseline to simply maintain flat cash funding. With government grant going down, the impact of the funding formula, the precept just provides a degree of stability and sustainability to my funding, so it provides flat cash. However, we couldn't balance the books next year at 18-19 with the pressures and the demands. So the precept proposal today is 4.49%, and that's based on 3 key metrics, really. It balances the books for next year, so I haven't got to rely on reserves to balance the books or additional efficiencies. It also, because the council tax base has gone down, maintains a similar sort of deficit by 22-23, because the council tax base I'd foreseen going forward, what about the actual basis of the local authorities, i.e. the number of Band D properties upon which I can levy the precept, that's gone down. Also, the shift in the precept reflects the public findings. So we had support for 399, we had support for 499. If I was being prudent as the accountant I am and put in the margin of error of minus 4%, we had borderline support for sort of 499. So I took a halfway house of 449 based on the public element alone. Also, and this is key, and a point I made earlier, the precept helps maintain those police officer and police community support officer numbers longer into the future. It's about maintaining those numbers for longer, because we can't continue, if austerity continues and continues and continues, the sustainability of that policing model that we've only about to hit establishment on, which is, you know, incredible news for me that we're hitting a full establishment, and certainly more incredible news for policing colleagues to have established officers out there. That was the other rationale, is to maintain that precept, to maintain numbers. I've touched very briefly on the precept tax base that has gone down. We'd assumed 1% moving forward. When we got the figures in, it was 0.81%. And then moving forward, because I always take a 3-year average of what the precept base or the council tax base has done, I've had to reduce down my expectations of the number of properties we can levy precept on. So on the basis of my precept clicking up a bit, that was about 238,000 extra money next year. The tax base going down was £93,000 less, a net effect of about 155,000, which enabled me then to balance the books. So that was an important facet. The other key thing about funding is the unknown elements of specific grants. So we get a number of specific grants outside of the main government grant, PCSOs, schools liaison, safety camera, etc. And there's 2 aspects around that. It's not just the sustainability there moving forward, will they still be there in the future, but every year they're flat cashed. So we get the same grant for PCSOs this year, next year, as we have had for the same previous number of years. So that means the force via the Commissioner needs to find the funding source to pay for pay awards, incremental move, etc., etc. So the government funding position is always very, very tight. If I talk about expenditure, the key facet of expenditure is the number of officers, number of PCSOs, with 83% staff costs. So the budget moving forward is 1,279 police officers, back from about 1,162 sort of 2 years ago. So you can see how that investment has come through, and the desire is to maintain that establishment. We talk in the report about utilisation rates that have seen the police officers across Gwent being higher than what the norm should be. We've talked about maintaining PCSO numbers, and we've talked about the staff being the flexible aspect, that we maintain that frontline provision, and the staying ahead programme moving forward maintains a flexible staff establishment, so we maintain that pressure on frontline resources. The 18-19 budgets have all been rebased since last year, so we throw them up in the air, start from scratch again and build them up. And we accelerated that piece of work this year, so that was concluded before Christmas. There's a 2% pay award built in this year for police officers. The police staff side hasn't been concluded yet, but that's something beyond the Commissioner's control that he needs to accommodate. It's unavoidable, but there's no government funding for that. When you build in pension and incremental drift, so the pension pressures on the local government pension scheme that we're all experiencing, special local authority members, there's about 2 million built into next year of unavoidable costs. They just come with employing people. A built-in general inflation of 2%, utilities about 5%, and again that was significantly rebased this year There's large areas of investment, the police education qualification framework, which is a standard national framework that sets the minimum qualification levels by rank for policing, so it's professionalised the policing agenda. That's coming through into fruition during 1819. And we've talked about the double whammy, that we not only pay the levy, the apprenticeship levy, but because that doesn't filter through into policing in Wales, we then need to invest in the training programme as well. We've talked about ICT investment, the revenue implications, cloud licences, national enabling programmes that want police to have a cloud ICT, an ICT cloud base. There's capital expenditure coming through of £44 million over the next 5 years. The estate strategy, the HQ, key aspects, but the investment around ICT to deliver long-term efficiencies, that all comes through in the capital programme. There's other long-term projects of nearly £15 million over the next 5 years. A lot of that is with collaboration with South Wales Police with the Fusion programme that will deliver state-of-the-art, technology and data for policing to use so they can spend more time on the front line rather than returning to stations to complete statements or paperwork, etc., etc. You'll note with the capital programme that there's only very limited calls I have for funding around that. It's capital grant, reserves, borrowing. Borrowing puts pressure on the precept, as you can appreciate, or revenue contribution to capital, again puts pressure. So the committed funds, the reserves of committed funds are fully utilised by 1920 on delivering the capital programme. So we have in the MTFP today, because they get fully utilised, about £22 million worth of borrowing forecast into the future. If I touch down on efficiencies, because the key element is as funding is flatlined and expenditure is going up, you don't make up all that gap with precept. We never have, we never will. A huge efficiency programme. So to date, from 2008-9 to 17-18, Gwent Police has delivered £49.3 million worth of efficiency savings. You recall my graph of the red expenditure line going up and the flat cash funding line, and that's been delivered through the Staying Ahead programme. The remaining recurrent deficit, even taking account of today's precept increase and forecast ones at 3.99, there's still £11 million deficit by 22-23. HMIC produce value for money profiles every year. They never give you the answer, they shine the light. They compare you nationally to other forces and to your most similar forces that you share similar characteristics with. And the current indication is, if we were based on our average force with our most similar group, we're probably about £16 million more expensive. That's not saying that's right or wrong, because a lot of that differentiation could be down to local decisions, local dynamics. You recall Gwent is a small force, so we don't exploit the economies of scale that bigger forces have. So we're out of kilter on paper by that amount, but that might be down to valid, reasonable reasons, plus additional specific grant funding that we have in Welsh Government that other English counterparts don't, example PCSOs. The indicative efficiency savings plan between 18-19 and 22-23 is about £6 million. It was 6.3 million when I presented that in December. And that still shows a remaining recurrent unmet deficit. So when I take my gross deficit of 10.9 million, take off my £6 million of forecast savings, which need a lot of fleshing out and a lot of work to deliver, to the backdrop of 49 million we've already delivered, we've got a deficit of about 4.8 million moving forward. If I talk about the wider economy, because that impacts on so many various parts of the sort of financial envelope that we work in, the government at the autumn budget recently announced that GDP growth is down, so the productivity of UK PLC is down by half a percentage point. Interest rates are forecast to go up to about 1.25 by March 21. They're about 0.5% then. So you appreciate the £22 million worth of borrowing I've got is highly exposed to interest rate movement. Inflation forecast to come down slightly, from 3% currently down to about 2% by 2020. There's the uncertainty of Brexit. 3.7 billion has already been put aside in the autumn budget, and we could be faced with a 40 billion to 50 billion, what they term in the divorce bill. Unemployment, fortunately, playing the other way, has been stable. I think we've got the lowest unemployment rates for about 40 years. But all these dynamics play into the financial modelling. If I then talk about external influences, we've talked at length in the December meeting and in the paper today, and I'm thankful that ACC Kirk is here today to talk about the emerging demands and the visibility of the safeguarding work that Gwent Police does, the amount of resource that is consumed to prevent the crime or deal with hidden crimes that the majority of the public in Gwent just don't know what goes on under the radar, and the complexity of that. We've talked about public expectations. growing as we move forward with the 50-50 split of funding by 22-23, that the public of Gwent will have a far greater say in the policing that's delivered. I've talked about balancing the local, national, regional, international threats. Policing and crime now are international. So the demands upon Gwent to deal with those aspects is huge. We're not alone in the austerity programme. Local authority partners have been on a similar sort of journey. So when we're trying to evolve into a one public ethos approach, and it's difficult because the natural reaction as partners retrench is to almost go back into silo working rather than attempt to invest your way. Two key external influences I regularly talk about are the Gwent public finances and the Welsh policing public finances, and I usually use a precept metric to bring this to light. So if I talk about local authority precept increases, and I appreciate these are still provisional at this point in time, but the Gwent local authority precept increases for 18-19 range from about 3.7% to potentially 5%. So the median figure, the middle figure, is about 4.52%. Note our precept proposal today, 4.49%. The mean, if I just take a very rough average of the 5, is 4.47%. Ours is 4.49, so a fraction of a percent difference. And there is no mode, there is no most popular number within there. And I think the point we need to make, we talk about percentages quite regularly. So a 4.49% increase on the precept for the Commissioner is just over £10 a year. If I take the local authority in Gwent with the current lowest band D precept, and I put theirs up by 4.49%, it's £45 different. So there's a 4-factor differential. Same precept percentage, but a 4-factor in pound notes to the average band D payer. And if I talk about Welsh PCC, so the other 3 Welsh PCs, important because they're living in our world. They're faced with the same demands we are in Gwent. They currently range from 3.58% precept increase for next year to 7%. If I take the middle figure, it's about 5%. If I take the mean, it's 5.19%. And there is no most popular figure. So you can see how we compare. It's an important benchmark that are we out of kilter with local authority partners who live and breathe our world, but also the policing dynamic throughout. If I then talk the last 2 around sort of financial risks and opportunities and a bit about performance, the risks and opportunities with the Brexit and the economy. We've got the Her Majesty's Treasury Efficiency Review. So on top of the CSR, the Treasury initiated an efficiency review a couple of years ago to try to get about 3.5 billion out of public sector departments by 1920. They've delivered 2.4 billion. They're not going to pursue the extra 1.1 billion, thankfully. There's the threat of the next comprehensive spending review in 2019, which will again rebase government departments. Home Office, very acute for us. There's the funding formula. There's forthcoming Home Office reallocations or top slicing, because once the totality of policing budgets is known, the Home Office then still have the ability to move stuff into other areas of the Home Office responsibilities, Border Force or other armed length bodies, HMIC, Independent Police Complaints Commission, which is soon to be renamed the Office of...
Independent Office of Police Conduct.
There we are. On the 8th of January. And also around Home Office programmes of work, around big infrastructure, around the replacement for Airwave, the Emergency Services Mobile Communications Programme. I've talked about the big risk about capital financing. My capital grant pays for about 1/3 of my fleet replacement every year. The sustainability of the efficiencies, £49 million bank to date. But then there's some opportunities around income generation, public service boards, legislative changes which could give the Commissioner more powers to attract income generation opportunities, and the commissioning world, the one public ethos, the work that's coming out of PSBs. And the last sort of part of the theme is around performance. We're forecasting a £5 million outturn at 17-18 that is fully committed, because that outturn is fully recognised by the time it's taken for us to get officers in through a year. In terms of context, from the time the advert goes out for police officers to the time they're on independent patrol, and I hope I get this right, about 14 months. So you can imagine the amount of work that the HR department in Gwent Police has done to get 320 in over the last 2 years, with those kind of profiles, those kind of investment between the assessment centres, the application, the classroom-based training, the tutor constable before they're released. So that money, that outturn this year, is fully committed. We hit establishment at basically 31st of March. So any subsequent precept increase we've had is already accounted for and is invested in those police officer numbers. And from a force performance and overarching force performance, you already know HMIC Peel, 3 year of good assessments by the force. That sort of brings together the headlines and the highlights of the report. Happy to take any questions at this point, Chair.
Yeah, Tony is coming up with a question, but Lisa has a question relating to your particular presentation.
Thanks, Darren. You said we got 1,279 police officers now, and we've had 320 new officers in the last 2 years. So is that 320 on top of natural wastage? So if it is, was it that we had 959 officers 2 years ago? That's why I want to differentiate between how many are natural waste, replacing natural wastage, how many are new, because we've had guarantees in the past that, we're going to put 100 new officers in this year. So I want to know the difference between what has been natural wastage and what has been additional.
Okay, Darren can give the precise figures, but no. For example, we're recruiting this financial year about 160 new officers, but that is not a net gain, because every year a number of police officers, 60 or thereabouts, will retire or leave for other reasons. So it's not a net gain. It shouldn't be seen in that way. But on this particular point, for me, the reason why we're putting the bid forward that we are, the biggest single reason for me is to maintain those police officers in a sustainable way, because the feedback that I get from the public through a variety of engagements, events, always the number one issue is police visibility, more bobbies on the beat, so to speak. And whilst I recognise, of course, as Darren has alluded to, the changing nature of crime, and I have to give a lot of attention and credence to those public views, and the only way I can maintain that is with cash. Darren?
Commissioner, thank you. The new posts from last budget set was 40 new posts. So that's the key figure in this. So of that 320, 40 of them went into brand new posts, so we grew the establishment. The remainder were to replace, over those 2 years, at various times, the people who have left. And also, as part of the Staying Ahead programme, there were a number of posts, of police officer posts, that you see the phrase in the report called amber posts. They were on the peripheries, and we would estimate through business cases whether they will still be required. A significant number of those, I think about 42, have also come into the establishment, into frontline roles, into more visible roles.
Tony, I believe you want some clarification on this?
Well, it really follows on from Councillor Winnett's question. It's regarding the points you're making in the report that if you had a standstill budget of 3.99, technically you wouldn't create any new police officers, but 4.99 would produce 10, 599 would produce 20. And the question that Lisa's asked really is the basis of the fallout of the ones who've gone, based on the ones you've got. But in the financial year previously, you created these new posts within budget. So really and truly, it's a bit of a red herring to say that if we had a 5.99, we could produce extra police officers, whereas at the moment, you are within the system producing those police officers within the budget based, I think, on people leaving, which then would be on a higher rate of salary, as to ones coming in, which are on a lower rate of salary. The one would balance out the other. Is my surmise correct?
The way we worded the precept, that increase, we said the difference between 399 and 499 equates to, was just to give the public a baseline of context. So £500,000 is about 10 police officers, did about 50,000 gross costs, so that's what we do. So the way we structure the precept is, because we've hit establishment now, any future increase in precept helps maintain that establishment longer. So we don't necessarily look at growing, but it maintains it for longer into the future. It's a maintaining strategy, because if I can't put the precept up, the existing ones become more expensive because I've got to fund, pay award and incremental drift, etc., etc. So it's very much more about maintaining it longer into the future. Now, last year's precept did create additional money to pay for new officers. And the rationale is because we did another significant amount of saving programme last year. We took about £7 million out of last year's budget to release back into the force for investment. And part of that investment was 40 new police officers. That's parked, that's done, that's funded. This year, moving forward, the precept proposal is to maintain that investment longer into the future. If the precept doesn't come to fruition, that establishment drops off. I can't afford it for longer. Because what you've got to remember, and apologies, you know this, that once the precept goes up, it stays in my base budget forever. If I don't put it up, I've lost it forever to try to reclaw back. And you've seen that with a number of political precept decisions around the countries over the last couple of years where we've had 0% increases. Then the next year, they've had 5% or even 6 or 7 to try to make it back up. We try to avoid sawtooth budgeting. We are continually looking at how we invest and maintain, and this is about a maintaining budget. Let me first time in goodness knows how long we're hitting police officer establishment, all because of the excellent work in the investment in precept last year, the efficiency programme, and this is about trying to maintain those numbers for as long as possible to the backdrop of austerity.
So as an additional question, what is the sustainability of that policy? When will it give you, as you consider, a drop-off in not having sufficient police officers? Because that is our main concern. And the questions you pose to the public, were they based on how many police officers have we got, or are you prepared to pay more for your precept? It's a drive.
There was context around the maintaining the investment. So when we did the public survey, it was around this is a maintaining the investment question, because we've already asked you to invest in the past, and we've banked that money, and we've invested in police officers. So it's about maintaining that going forward. But to go back to your first question, the sword of Damocles is the funding formula. So we plan as an accountant and as an advisor to the Commissioner, I plan for the worst and hope for the best. Now that funding formula, current expectations from the Policing Minister could hit in 2020. So I have an affordable policing model till 1920. So or the next financial year after, based on 4.49, we can maintain establishments, the full establishment, 1,279 police officers across Gwent for 2 financial years. And that's a couple of hundred more than we've ever experienced since austerity, because you remember the austerity, we come from about 1496 right the way down. Now, if that funding formula doesn't hit and takes another £6 million out of our budget, the sustainability of my policing model could be extended. Because you're right, I always sit here going, if we're going to recruit police officers for the public in Gwent, I don't want to, in a year time, to have another voluntary exit scheme and lose 100 officers. That's perverse, because they just see this boom and bust model, and that's not what we're about. We're about establishing a baseline, understanding demand. So what we see in the future, and also if I need to manage movement in the establishment, it links back into my investment with the Fusion programme and mobile data. So a true efficiency, if we did have to move the police officer establishment down, I would aim to see no difference in productivity. They would just become more efficient because of the investment that we're putting into ICT, mobile devices. So you'll see your officers turning up to witness statements on their Samsung devices. And it's really exploiting that Wi-Fi enabled police cars, so officers can sit on ruggedized laptops, work, etc. So any future movement on that establishment is going to be more about real efficiency rather than what we've had to see just about cutting numbers.
Jason, I believe you got a follow-up on that.
Yeah, what it is now, when you're going to, if I read to this, your precept on page 65, paragraph 30, you said your precept's 4.49. I've noticed on page 66, on paragraph 32b, it's got 4.99 with the equivalent of 22 pence a week. Also on page 67, 35b, you've got the the tax precept again increase there for 4.99, and also paragraph 36 where he has supported a 4.99 increase of borderline of 50.6. Is that the right? Is it 4.49 or 4.99?
The paragraph you've highlighted are what we went out to survey on, and they were 3.99, 4.99 and 5.99, so the narrative is correct. 4.499 was the point I mentioned in my preamble. I concluded at 4.49 because 3.99 didn't balance the books next year. 4.99 provided me with a small surplus. 4.49 balanced my books. I also took 4.49, which you notice is the midway point between 399 and 499, because with the survey results, if I built in the margin of error that you build into surveys and took that the worst case scenario that all my results were 4% too high, I still had overwhelming support for 3.99. I was borderline for 4.99. So hence I brought it back 0.5%. And importantly, 4.499 also manages the reduction in council tax base over the life of my MTFP, because that went down. I was expecting about a 1% per annum increase in council tax base number of properties, and it's gone down to 0.81 next year and 0.92 thereafter. So the 4.49 managed that through. And also 4.49 versus 3.99, that extra 0.5%, and it's back to Tony's point, keeps my police officer establishment that extra bit longer. It's worth 5 police officers for a year. That difference, a 0.5%, is £250,000. That's the difference between 5 police officers extra for a whole year that can make a huge amount of difference. When you think about the teams we're building, the real key to the Pollitt team, it's single number officers. And you think about the leverage, though, the Pollitt team I talk about in the report. So 5 officers could be the difference between horrendous crime happening and not. It's that marginal. So yeah, the narrative's correct. So just to summarise, survey went out on 399, 499, 599, but due to that result and the financial modelling, we took the halfway house between the lower two.
With the 4.49, how much of a year then you equaling is going to be put on the for the count for the tax? Because on with the 499, you say you're equivalent to 22 pence a week. So on a 449, what is it equaling a week?
20p. £10.27 a year, about 20p. I had just a quick aside, one of the girls in the office said, I'm not very good at maths, but if that one's in between, is the pennies in between? And I got to think, yeah, pretty sure it is, yeah. It is. So it's 20 pence per week for the average Band D property in Gwent.
Gillian, and then Colin.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions. So between paragraphs 20 and 24, you talk about the funding for Tarion, the PCSOs and Connect Gwent, how that's still not confirmed. I mean, obviously that's gone on over a number of years, so we're hoping it'll maintain. So what are the risks around that? And how would you then fund any shortfall? Because that would obviously be quite a significant amount of money should the funding for those not come through.
The funding, we're reasonably content that the funding, especially on the PCSO money, it will come through. The risk is always, it's never future-proofed. So we account for that. So in the overall budget you see today, the 4.49% mitigates the issue that the PCSO money doesn't pay for that. The big risk is around, so schools liaison, we've already articulated, will probably drop off in about 2 years' time. Tarion has already dropped off. Yeah. The risk for me is around the MOJ money. Because we fund Connect Gwent on that. I've heard nothing on the grapevine or nationally around the complete removal of it. It's more around reductions around the margins. So the MOJ money has gone from sort of 686 down to 680. It could be 670. And what we've done to a certain degree is made a provision in reserves that if we did take a big hit in a year, because it's contract spend that is, we would manage it non-recurrently whilst we enabled us time to renegotiate contracts around Connect Gwent. So it's all part of my risk management profile. But you are right, every year you sit in this report and there's significant amounts of specific grants that don't come through. I think they'll arrive. It'll be around what that variability is.
Yes, just on, thank you, Chair. On this particular matter, just for completeness, in terms of the All Wales School Liaison Programme, I've had discussions with Vaughan Gethin, the Cabinet Secretary for Health at the Welsh Government, because it's his budget that it comes from. There are clearly issues. They're under pressure, and they're certainly looking at monies they spend in non-devolved areas. So that we're hoping to get some sort of change of heart, not for next financial year, it's the financial year after that, 1920. But what is written here is how things are at this moment. We're continuing to work closely with Welsh Government. After all, they provide voluntarily money for PCSOs, 101 in Gwent. And certainly we're about to begin a quite separate programme called the ACES programme, Adverse Childhood Experiences programme, which is a Wales-wide programme, which will obviously impact on issues like education and health, which are devolved, and we're looking for some sort of quid pro quo. But as things stand at the moment, it's what's written here.
Chair, the responses you had to the survey, the 600 plus responses, how representative were they of Gwent itself?
We have a report that's going to the OPCC Exec Board 30th of this month. And within that report, it does confirm the read across the local authorities. Unfortunately, I've only got a black and white copy here, but it looks like about 28% from Caerphilly, 23% Monmouthshire, 21% Newport, 20% Torfaen, and 8% Blaenau Gwent. So a bit of a diminishing. Now, the key thing about that report, I think I say in the narrative, is that those are the key aspects that we want to get to the bottom of it. So not necessarily was, appreciate a key part for me was around the precept conversation. The free text is the most important stuff. Because if the public, if we've got this opportunity to have a statistically robust sample of public engaging with us, we have significant free text that they put in supportive of the precept, but also not supporting the precept. So we're taking that to our op-exec meeting at the end of this month, and then that will be subsequently taken forward to the Strategy and Performance Board with the Chief Constable, because there'll be significant amounts of work that we can draw from that. And a key one for me is the Blaenau Gwent engagement at 8%. Why? What are we not doing right? Because we try to push it through social media. So there's something there for us. And certainly working with elected members, how we can get that messaging out. Because you recall the conversation we had at the last Police and Crime panel meeting around the messaging. There's a lot of activity that we do. There's a lot of good things we do. And it's how we get that messaging out. So that's key. But we will share that with you in due course.
Thank you. In terms of the savings going forward, what are the current multi-agency projects that you're looking at that may generate some savings?
The big one for me is around, multi-agency safeguarding hub. We've been exploring for a number of years, and we're down the avenue of a sort of a digital solution to this. I'll probably start this, and I'll probably look at other colleagues who are probably bring it further to light. Significant work around Police Transformation Fund, around the ACES agenda. So you'll recall, I may have mentioned it last time, a £7 million bid was successful from the Police Transformation Fund for the 4 Welsh forces, Public Health Wales, about tackling the core route of the acute childhood experience, because that's about the future demand coming in, and that's not just about demand into policing, but into public services, health, local authorities, etc. So from my perspective, those are two very important ones. The third I'll just throw in is around the Fusion programme with South Wales Police. Significant investment, one platform, integrated, standardised, simplified ICT frameworks. So we're not spending money doing this and spending money doing that. Huge interoperability between the forces. So because criminality doesn't pay much regard to borders as you move from South Wales into Gwent. Those are 3 from me, but I'll sort of pass across the line if anybody else got.
I suppose just to add, I'm pleased you mentioned the aspect. I think it's multi-agency and working with partners on one hand, but the aspect of collaboration is equally a significant factor in collaboration with with both South Wales Police, but also all of our policing colleagues across Wales. And there was an All Wales Policing and PCC Day back in November, which clearly established a priority for our collaboration work and really driving delivery against those objectives. I think the work that we've already picked up on ACES is absolutely clear. I think there are some other areas. Obviously, the ACES programme is an opportunity to put some very clear investment into our work, but it is a partnership work between ourselves as the four PCCs, the police forces, with Public Health Wales, but critically working with our local authority partners. I went to a meeting with our superintendent who's leading that work last week with the 5 directors of education, and we're critically wanting to work with our directors of education across all 5 authorities who gave us that commitment to see how we can drive a different way of working to ensure that that early intervention prevention work is really driving significant impact for people in our communities. We've got a significant programme in relation to domestic violence, and the Commissioner is just undertaking a review of the sexual violence services across Gwent. That has been done through the auspices of the Violence Against Women, Domestic Abuse and Sexual Violence Board for Gwent. The reason for doing that through the board is that when we have the recommendations for that, the expectation will be that all partners look at how we can work more effectively with the resources we've got to drive better impact on the area of sexual violence. And the last one that I would want to really pay attention to, because I think it is the good news story in terms of the investment that this panel has provided, is on mental health, both in terms of mental health for our officers and building that resilience and knowing how concerned you have been about some of our health and well-being reports that we've brought here in terms of the impact on our officers. I know that again in the Deputy Chief Constable's board last week, a critical area of work that we're very concerned about is around assaults on officers and wanting to think about how we particularly drive on that agenda. But we will be, and for those of you who have been to the Force Control Room, by the end of this month we will have our full complement of mental health practitioners in the Force Control Room who will be providing an input on every shift. And that again is subject of conversations that we have with Anira and Bevan in terms of looking at the long-term funding for that element of work. But we also have commissioned Swansea University to do an independent evaluation of the mental health practitioners in the control room to very much provide the evidence of how that benefits an intervention programme. Sorry, I did say that was my final version, but the final one, I suppose, is an area of work that I'm leading on as well around our criminal justice partners. And again, I know that's a particular interest of members of this committee, and we're looking to both extend and further the work that we do in our Women's Pathfinder, looking at diversion of women from our criminal justice system, but actually are in the process of developing, and we'll have a stakeholder event later this month, again very much in line with the questions and your scrutiny of us, that diversion scheme will become an all-people diversion scheme, looking at both our young people 18 to 25, our ex-service personnel, but also men of all ages as well as women, so that we're actively working to reduce the costs to our criminal justice system by having, again, early intervention and diversion programmes.
Chair, if I may just add two points to that. Certainly, Monday of this week, I met the 5 new mental health practitioners during their induction, and we had a very good discussion. It is an excellent example of collaboration and will certainly help in moving the notion that the police are first and last resort in terms of dealing with people with a mental health crisis, whether they're victims, perpetrators, or involved in an incident. and that certainly will liberate a lot of time for officers and, of course, go towards meeting the requirements of the new Policing and Crime Act in terms of who you can and cannot take into police custody. So that's a very good example. There is, however, quite a separate matter that's a fly in the ointment, and Darren alluded to the issue of the apprenticeship levy. I need to be clear with people. I don't want to go into all the political ramifications of this, but at this moment, the 4 Welsh police forces will not be able to draw back the money that they have invested, as they have to, into the apprenticeship levy with the Chancellor of the Exchequer. So at this moment, it appears that roughly Gwent's contribution was £500,000. Roughly, at this point, it does seem that we could have to pay that again if we're to maintain the same level of professional standards that will become the norm in England. And we cannot allow the situation where Welsh police officers are not trained to the same level or have the same opportunities for development as they do in England. And England don't want that either, because they, into border operability, we have to be sure that police officers are trained to the same extent. Those are discussions that are going on all the time now to get this matter resolved. I trust that it's more one of confusion than deliberate attempts to undermine the process of devolution, but that's involved in it. Policing is not devolved. That doesn't seem to be quite understood by Westminster, but it's a problem that we may have to face.
Could I just come in on that and say that we as a panel, I would say, would be registering our concern on that in particular, really.
I think you can see from the responses how passionate we are about partnership working, and I won't repeat the many examples that have been given. I think the crux of our work with partnerships is we're often working with other agencies who are also facing significant funding cuts, and so our work with the specials and the ambulance as a joint response unit, some of that will actually in some ways be helping them more than us initially, but it's absolutely the right thing to do, because otherwise the policing is the last port of call, and we will never say no, because we're there to protect people. We are exploring as many opportunities as we can about working with the fire service, and that's growing. Obviously in England, the Police and Crime Commissioner has responsibility for the fire service. Although we don't here, we still are working very, very closely, and that's proving very good with the state strategy, but also on some operational levels as well. We are really trying to hold our nerve around early intervention and prevention and investing in that area. It is then notoriously difficult to measure your impact. And my main thing to reiterate around trying to keep the officer levels and police staff levels sustainable is that that allows us to look at prevention and early intervention, and it allows us to look at proactivity. Because proactivity, going after people with specialist resources can only happen if you're actually able to react to the demand that's coming through the door. And so it really does free up to have that holistic look at policing.
Chair, sorry.
Thank you very much, because I think it is important for us as a panel to recognise that partnership working isn't just about making... It is fundamentally about making savings, but actually the impact it can have for the benefit of the force is huge. So thank you very much for that very comprehensive response. My final question then is around the estate management savings that we're looking at in here. I'm assuming that they are based on the expected savings. Obviously, the estate management strategy has yet to be finalised. So that's based on what you feel can be delivered, not what you believe can actually be delivered following the finalised strategy.
Yes. But no.
There's a number of people want to come in, but we got to try and keep some sort of order. This Colin has been waiting some time.
Darren, got a few things I want to ask you. Could we start off by getting some idea of what the forecast outturn is for the current year?
That's within the report. That's the five...
Apologies if I missed it.
Yeah. There's a section in the report entitled Outturn. I'll just draw your attention to it. It's at paragraph 56.
Oh, right, okay.
And what it brings, it basically reaffirms what I said in my preamble. There's a £5 million outturn at the end of this financial year, which equates exactly to the profiling of the police officers we've been bringing in over the year. So we'll be bringing in 160 new officers into Gwent Police during 17-18. The profile of those coming in, because you can appreciate, I said earlier, it takes 14 months from advert out to independent patrol. The way we've profiled, because we brought in 320 over 2 years, the last 100 officers of those 320 land January, February, March now. 100 officers, 50,000 a year, 5 million. It correlates exactly. And that's, in the detail, that's what it's down to. Now, where I take great confidence is that's already, it's non-recurrent for a start, but it's already fully committed. Because if we were able to bring all those officers in at the 1st of April last year, bang, land 160 new officers, then that underspend wouldn't appear. So it's completely allocated to the timing difference of setting the budget a year ago and our physical ability to get officers in. But great confidence I've got, it's already committed because we hit full establishment at the 31st of March. Ergo, the precept decision we made a year ago is a robust decision because it's invested in police. It's been part of the equation to recruit those officers and, importantly, maintain those officers.
Going to the appendices, there are a few things, and again, I was interested in the mental health issue. We all know that's a big thing, but at one stage, I thought we were talking about we may have been the actual health of the staff as well, because all these, all these, you know, you said 0.5% equated to 5 officers. Well, that could easily be negated if there are lots of people not in work for various reasons. But you mentioned amber posts at one stage. Now, looking on page 93, it seems that there's a forecast saving of 1.1 million on amber posts. Could you give us some idea of what is regarded as an amber post?
Certainly, it was a post. When we created the operational policing model back in 2015, there was a set parameter of officer numbers. At that time, we had more officers than the establishment that was created. So not more officers than we needed to police, but what that operational model was determined. And if you recall, fundamentally, that operational model was determined on affordability metrics and not on demand metrics. It was an affordability point of view. So there was a number of officers who were sat outside of kind of known operational posts that were still contributing to the organisation, working on projects, working on programmes of work, particularly in sort of staying ahead of the change management programme. So it was decisions around whether those posts stayed on programmes and projects or got absorbed into the establishment. So this financial year, they've been absorbed into the establishment as police officers. That related saving is an estimate that as we move forward, as we leverage or increase productivity of police officers through mobile data technology and new ways of working, etc., you may be able to rewind that investment back out. Because you still recall, we've still got a £10.9 million deficit to hit by 22-23. So a lot of the savings programmes are predicated in the time, or are predicated by the funding formula changes. So we phased a lot of the unpalatable savings opportunities later in financial years to correlate with potential loss of funding formula. Because I would be in a, you know, I wouldn't feel very comfortable to accelerate savings of police officer posts and the funding formula didn't hit. So that's part of that correlation, Colin, is putting some unpalatable savings around posts that we've just put back into the structure that may have to come back out if you're faced with the degree of government cuts and the degree of funding formula changes that we forecast.
Yeah, for example, I learned the other day that the sort of expert advice from the police on traffic matters is now, well, the officer doesn't exist. You know? I mean, are there other, I mean, that was an example that I had in mind. I was wondering whether there were any other sort of things that you feel are superfluous to establishment as such.
Yeah, the amber isn't necessarily that they're not fulfilling a really important function. So at the moment, a lot of our crime management unit posts are amber posts. So they're part of the force control room. They do a lot of the criming from members of the public when they phone in. They're amber because we haven't finished all the reviews of that area to decide which is the best model for force control room. And so at the moment, they're not permanent posts, they're amber under consideration. So sometimes that's what amber means. Sometimes what amber means is that we've done a review of a department and there may be 2 or 3 officers that are coming up for retirement, say in 4 months. So you leave them there where they are, and then when they drop off, they're not replaced. So that can be an amber post as well. So it's one of the terms that we use for managing through the change programme.
Okay, thanks. Again, you mentioned earlier the multi-agency safeguarding hub. On that same page, there's 769,000 forecast saving. I mean, surely that's going to have a huge effect on what's going on, or is that money coming from somewhere else? I mean,
it's a reassessment of the funding required to deliver that piece of work. You'll recall we put about 1.4 million pound in probably 15-16 to deliver the multi-agency safeguarding hub. It was part of our offer to get it up, running and working and delivering the benefits. The most recent estimate of the budget required to deliver that, we talk about more of a digital solution now, more of a virtual hub than a sort of, a physical hub, is to halve that budget. But you'll also recall, or you also note there, we've pushed that into 1920, not accepted the saving this year, to ensure, because you almost don't want to cut off your nose, spite your face, put the money in, take it away, and not actually deliver what it's supposed to deliver. Because ultimately, the MASH money was an invest to save. If we get that right, if we get our multi-agency safeguarding piece of work across all partners, that's a demand management piece of work. To manage that, it's the prevention stuff, it's the stuff the ACC was talking about, being able to invest in the preventative and proactive stuff rather than reactive stuff. So that's a current estimate of what the new budget would look like. We've basically halved it on a different solution to the original problem. If I should look at colleagues, any additional to that?
The only additional thing I'd add to that is the Missing Children's Hub was always a precursor to the multi-agency safeguarding hub as a proof of concept, and we've just been successful in gaining a £1 million lottery bid to support that. Now that is with our partners, and they've had difficulty in being able to sign up to 5-year commitment, but they have. And so some of the money that was in the MASH budget isn't needed for that particular aspect because we've got lottery funding. So all of those are areas where we exchange information with partners, and what we're trying to do is rationalise that so there's just one place. So that's connected with the MASH, with the Missing Children's Hub, and with the ACES work.
please hear what the investors say, but I was wondering about the lottery. I don't know if I've got to start buying tickets or...
That's my treasury management strategy.
But so there's one I think which interests all of us, and looking over Leaf. I read that we're looking to save £1 million on local policing. Now, local policing to most of us would mean somebody walking down the street in a uniform, and that's a heck of a lot of officers, I would have thought. Can you put a little bit of flesh on that one?
I certainly can. I can discuss this at length. In my preamble and within the report, we took. I'll be done by past.
You've already done the one word.
Yeah. You recall that the efficiency plans going forward were based on the HMIC value for money profiles, and they needed a number of pieces of work to flesh them out. So at this point in time, this schedule reflects potential opportunities for savings. Now, local policing, you're absolutely right, that's what we're investing in. But it says, the value for money profile says, you're about £1 million out of kilter with your most similar forces around local policing. Why? Well, that's probably because in Gwent we've taken a local decision to invest in frontline visible officers. Other forces may not have. Also, we got a high frontline visible metric because we have additional PCSOs compared to English counterparts, etc. So there's a number of dynamics. So that just shines a light that says it's about £1 million. The reason it's gone in there, though, is potentially, it goes back to the other point I made around productivity of officers. So if we can actually make officers more efficient through utilising mobile technology, through managing demand with partners, so a lot more than our prevention agenda, etc., we could potentially, hypothetically, deliver the same outcomes and services with 20 police officers left, because that's 20 police officers. Less. And again, a third point I'd make, you'll note is pushed to 2021, when we're into funding formula territory. So if the funding formula doesn't come to fruition, that's probably one of the first savings I wouldn't take. That's why it's there front and centre. So it's an indicator of where we're out of kilter with other forces. It could potentially be achieved through investment in mobile data and more efficient ways of working, but it's backed up well into the plan because it's the last resort. If the first two don't happen, it's the last thing I'd want to do.
I think everyone on this side of the table, and I know the Commissioner sort of values the local policing element, and I was looking at feedback from a discussion literally a couple of days ago where members in some areas were, councillors were actually complaining about the withdrawal of policing from rural areas and being pulled back into urban areas, and I'm sure that's not the sort of thing we want to be contemplating. Just a couple more, Chair, if I can. Again, so some big figures, Darren. The astronomic PFI comes up £4 million worth on 96 and 97. And again, if you want the two together, collaborative relocation joint firearms, £6 million. Is that a nice big building, or is it something else that we're looking at?
The PFI, you'll appreciate, we've been on a bit of a journey with our PFI. Back in about 2014, Treasury and the Local Government Association sponsored a team called Local Partnerships, who would come into public sector partners, to give their PFI schemes a health check, an MOT, if you will. So we welcomed them with open arms back in 2014. They went through our PFI contract with a fine-tooth comb. It was a solicitor and an accountant with expertise in this area. Went through our contract and concluded we had an exceptionally robust contract in place, and they tipped their hat to those who remember Dave Ansell, who was part of that piece of work, and said it's probably one of the most robust PFI contracts that they've seen. They provided a couple of opportunities in there to deliver value for money, essentially around in-housing some of the facilities management, waste, cleaning, that sort of thing, rather than pay through the contract, bring it in and add it to our own internal estates team to do, which we took that opportunity. But there's also another end of that spectrum around PFI contracts, but the ability to buy them out, to voluntarily terminate. And that was something that we wanted to explore. So we've done some preliminary work around whether that demonstrates value for money, and there seems to be some mileage in there. And you'll recall the way we fund our PFI scheme under best practices, we have a sinking fund sat in reserves, about £12 million. Because the way the funding of your PFI works, it's a 30-year programme. Your government grant lasts for 20 years, and in the last 10 years, you're on your own to pay for it. So we've set aside a reserve for the first 20 years that will be completely depleted in the last 10 years playing for the PFI. So there's cash banked, reserve banked on the balance sheet for that. So the £8 million is an estimate currently, those two lots of £4 million, to buy out the PFI, so pay off the loan, own the property, and then also buy out the contract of the provider going forward, because they've got a series of cash flows from the Commissioner up to about 2035. So they're still sat about another 17 years worth of cash flows, so you need to buy that out. So we've just gone out to tender for that piece of work. The results aren't confirmed yet, to take us on a journey, I suppose, to absolutely ascertain whether there is value for money in voluntarily terminating the PFI contract, and a financial estimate has been placed into the budget to conclude that. The second one you talked about, Colin, was around firearms collaboration, wasn't it? Yeah, this is a piece of work you'll appreciate. The backdrop to this is around terrorist threat, around armed sieges of shopping centres, etc., and the amount of training that armed response officers would need, with different weapons to tackle different size ranges. So we do South Wales Police is a collaborative venture with South Wales Police and potentially W Powers Police around a joint firearms provision between the three forces, building one bespoke, contributing just to, I suppose, to deal with the reality of the world as we're moving forward. But subject to...
Firing range.
What did I say? A firing range, sorry. Sorry.
Rather than an office block.
Yes, it's physically, it's a 100-metre range, isn't it? I think we've got a current 50-metre range in South Wales now, and this is a 100-metre range, I think. That's the provision for it. Yeah. But you'll notice it's 22-23. So significant piece of work around scoping out the business case, the options, the partners, and how that, I suppose, develops over the next 4 years.
Thank you. Just just a comment, Chair, on the proposed increase, and you've probably heard this before. It's there are people out there. It may not apply to anyone in this room, but there are people out there who are really struggling to get by. We hear about the increase in people in work poverty, people going to food banks, and so on. And every sort of penny makes a difference. Even the Prime Minister has recognised just about managing. What she's done about it is another matter. But the Commissioner pointed out earlier something that I think we know really, but that the government are pulling out of funding and basically saying, well, if you want policing, dig your hand in your pocket locally. But at the same time, it is a very difficult balancing act between that and the fact that, say, there are people out there who are finding it extremely difficult. As somebody pointed out earlier, we're looking at council tax rises as well because of funding cuts there. So it's all part of a picture which is really squeezing people, and year on year, day on day, really. And I think we've got to be very careful in looking at any sort of increase with that sort of background in mind.
Yeah, look, completely understand that point. It applies to the community where I live in Penparthiol, in the Mid-Rumney Valley. I understand the issue of the pressures that various policies have brought on people, low wages, no wages at all. Understand those concerns, absolutely. It's my job to strike a balance. I've never been a populist politician in the sense of doing what I think might be popular, unless I was also convinced it was the right thing to do. I would have been quite prepared to debate with the public and argue for the public for an even bigger increase if I was absolutely sure, together with the Chief Constable, that there was a solid business case for it and that everything could be managed in terms of more police officers. But we've agreed what we think is sustainable. As in life, it's a compromise, but I am acutely aware of the financial burden that all of this and the other increases that people have to face, in terms of their family finances. Understand that point absolutely, but I cannot avoid the obvious decision that I have to take in terms of providing a service at a sustainable level.
Right, next back in order is Mike and then Peter.
Thank you, Chair. I party for Torvine. I'm worried about the 10 people, the 10 policemen that you're going to have in the middle half of the budget. We never see a policeman now on duty in Bondipool on the beat or anywhere else. In my ward or anywhere, we never see a policeman on the beat. There's plenty of cars with two policemen in, plenty of cars flashing by and going by. And also another main concern is that PSOs, are investigating burglaries, coming to houses, investigating burglaries. And, you know, I'm disappointed in that. What I'm asking is, if these 10 policemen are employed on a middle basis, would we have more policemen on the beat? Sorry.
I'm disappointed if you never see any police officers walking through Pontypool, because that isn't... Sorry. I'm disappointed if you never see any police officers walking through Pontypool, because that should be the case. However, a lot of the visible walking along the streets and that sort of engagement is done by our police community support officers, because that is what they're there to do. When you talk about them investigating burglaries, the only thing they will have been asked to do sometimes is knock on the doors of houses to see whether anyone saw anything. And that's simply because their job is to talk to members of the public, and that would be within their role. They would never be the case officer for a burglary. They'd only be taking that information back to a police officer, saying somebody at such and such a number of the street saw something, you need to go and see them and take a statement. So I can reassure you they'd never actually be investigating burglaries. That's not their role. But I will take your views back to the Pontypool inspector around how much police officers are walking on the beat.
Can I come back, Chair? I can honestly say I go down Pontypool either to my council or shopping with my wife, and I can honestly say that I've never ever seen in the last 4 months basically a policeman walking. See plenty in cars,
yeah,
plenty in my ward coming up the roads, but I haven't seen a policeman walking for at least 4 months.
Where you say about the officers being in pairs, that is often out for safety these days, about what they could be called to respond to. And what we don't want is sometimes when they go to domestic abuse incidents or things that are quite violent, that you end up having to send 2 cars because otherwise police officers patrolling on their own. And you've seen in the news about police officers being assaulted. So that is a safety thing. But having day-to-day lots of officers walking on every street is really, really hard to resource with our numbers. But that doesn't mean you should never see one in Pontypool, so I will take that back.
Part of my question was, will this make any difference, these 10 extra police officers, make any difference to the policeman on the beat? Yes or no?
Right, it's now Peter and then Bill Ropley.
Thank you, Chairman. I picked up, Darren, at the beginning that you said that the number of bandees that you're expecting to draw precept from has gone down. With my planning hat on, certainly in Monmouthshire we're building more houses than ever currently. So can you explain to me, are you looking at the prediction for 18-19, or are you looking at what you're getting the income for 17-18?
The former. The prediction I had in was a growth of 1%. So from 216,000 properties across Gwent to about 218,000. That was our expectation. And that 1% was based on the growth we saw over the last 3 years. When we had the actual bases in, the growth, still growth, was only 0.81. So it's still gone up, but not to the degree we expected. It went up about 80% of what we'd expected. And in terms of financials, about £93,000 less we were expecting, because when you times up with the bandy, that's what it was.
Also in your presentation at the very beginning, you said our friendly Commissioner was expected to maximise the precept opportunities. Well, as usual, I look at the chart on page 55, and in Monmouthshire, although we currently only give you nearly £11 million a year, presumably if it is going up to a 50-50 balance by the year 2022, our contribution will be even more disproportional than it is now.
Disproportional in pound notes?
It's disproportional to the budget that Monmouthshire set as an authority, as compared with the, take for instance, Caerphilly and I presume that as the mass of that changes, so our disproportionate contribution will be higher. And I hope the people listening on the screen are taking note.
It will do by virtue, because we use a Band D equivalent, and it's based on the number of, so a Band I is 3 Band Ds, and a Band A is 2/3 of a Band E. So if a local authority has more houses above a Band D, then the disproportionality will be there, because they have it's the council tax is a property based tax, not a necessarily income based tax, and there's a number of pros and cons of the various taxation regimes. But yes, if Monmouthshire has more Band D equivalents because it has more Band E, F, G, H and I's, that's the, and Blaenau Gwent may have more Band A's and a disproportionate. It may be, and there's something in the middle.
Okay, Bill and then Stuart.
Thank you, Chairman. It's really directed at the Commissioner. In recent generations, traffic wardens used to be employed around the cities of Gwent and around the towns of Gwent. Then somebody had the bright idea that we would introduce PCSOs, and so we'll take the hat from the traffic wardens and we'll give it to the PCSOs. So traffic wardens were done away with, and the introduction of PCSOs were invented. The PCSOs' role was to support the police and to actually take over the function of traffic wardens. Now we move forward a generation, and with the decriminalisation of parking coming in, they're no longer going to be responsible for enforcing the regulation of that side of the Road Traffic Act. One of the biggest abilities that local councillors have is in attracting police attention to their areas, is to ring the PCSOs and get in contact, especially as parking is one of the biggest banes in most wards right throughout Gwent, and illegal parking and dangerous parking. That then produces, because they do react and they do come in and they do try to assist, that actually gives us some form of visible policing. With decriminalisation, we're going to go back to what is now going to be looked at as invisible policing. We've heard today that seeing police officers in the areas, in the wards, it's a very rare occurrence to see them walking on the beat, as it's been described. And I understand that the whole nature of policing is changing and has taken a different direction. But really, I don't think you've done enough here today to convince the public that visible policing is going to continue and in fact increase. Visible policing, as they expected, is only going to decrease now because of the decriminalisation of parking. We're going to see less police officers in the wards. I'm not saying that they're not going to be busy, but you haven't done enough to explain. And as far as the survey is concerned, it's not a robust survey at all. It's a minimum survey, if that. It's actually, if 4 people had not taken part in that survey, that would have taken you down to under 600, and your survey wouldn't be viable in any shape or form. So when we make our decision today, we We must make the decision from the background of what do the public understand about policing. They understand that they're seeing less, they're getting less for their money as far as they are concerned. The survey that you base it upon is not robust at all. However, I don't think you do enough to explain the way the future of policing is going. I don't think you've sold it enough. And the question is to you, what are you going to do, Commissioner, to develop a strategy that will be presenting more visible policing throughout Gwent? Because at the moment, whatever strategy you have, it's failed. Simple.
Thank you. I don't accept the premise of that point that you've made. I have to say that up front. In terms of the specifics, you are quite right. PCSOs do have the ability in terms of illegal parking to issue tickets, and they do, and I'm sure that ACC Kirk would want to comment on that. However, that is only one small aspect of their job, and I appreciate that illegal, inconsiderate, dangerous parking is something that bugs just about every community in Gwent, as it does right across Wales and indeed England. It is true that this matter is going to be decriminalised, and we've been in negotiations now with the 5 local authorities in Gwent to bring them up to the same level as the rest of Wales, and that by the end of this calendar year, indeed, it will be returning to the local authorities to be both the body that lays down the parking restrictions and then takes responsibility for its enforcement. And look, I don't see this, that in the presence of PCSOs is doing parking enforcement is necessarily means, if they don't do that, that visibility is decreasing at all. They'll be doing other things. But what we need to tackle, of course, is the problem of parking. That's the issue here. And it would be far more effective in our view, and I've not had any fundamental disagreements with this, come back to my office, for it to be enforced by the local authority. For one thing, they'll be able to keep the fines. Police can't. It has to go back to the Exchequer. It will be able to pay for itself and probably be a much greater deterrent in the long run to the problem of illegal, inconsiderate and indeed dangerous parking. And I am in discussions with, and this is raised with me whenever I hold my public surgeries. We can always do more in terms of communicating and making sure that people understand what we're doing. And one of the papers that we'll be dealing with later in terms of the joint communication strategy will be dealing with that issue. So I don't accept the premise of your question. I will ask ACC Kirk in a moment just to comment on things as they are, but can I say in terms of the survey, we want as many, and we do our level best, to get as many people to respond to surveys for this and other matters that we possibly can, and indeed that's part of the joint communication strategy. The point that was being made by Darren was that in terms of scientific surveys, the level of responses is, as he said, that is something that he can rely upon. It's good professional practice. It's not just a random number. In the past, we've not even had that level of response, but we managed to go forward. And quite frankly, the bottom line is, if I'm to maintain and improve with the Chief Constable police visibility, we need additional resource, not less. And that is something I'm sure that you will be concerned with.
Thank you. I think the parking decision has been covered in that response, but I think it is important to say that we are above average in terms of our visible front line here, and that's a great deal due to what you're funding and investing in. The PCSOs, we're not reducing. They'll still be there. It's just we want to redirect their efforts into the problem solving that they do out in the communities, the visibility. They are still there, and they're an integral part of neighbourhood policing, and parking is a big issue, but it shouldn't be their only issue, and local authority, I think, need to play their part in that. As for the officers and the visibility of officers, where I was asked, that extra 10, is that going to make the difference? And I said, not really. I think we need to put that into the context of how many officers we've had through the door in the last year. So where I was running the change programme, where we had all of those reductions, we were right to the bones on shift. We really were. And we were having a job to respond to the calls. So with these officers that are coming through, please don't underestimate the training and the coaching and, you know, all the work that needs to happen with them. They all have to, one of the reasons it can't be done so quickly is they all have to be tutored for a certain amount of time. So you will always see them in twos, because I would guarantee at the moment one of them's probably a new officer. But for the first time, the last few weeks, people have been saying in the shifts, we haven't got enough vehicles. And I am like, hallelujah. Hallelujah. Because actually, do you know what? It's not a God-given right either that you get in the car immediately. So we are going to start seeing police officers walking around, because I'm not about, and I can't afford to ask, to increase the fleet. So it's been a little bit of a tunnel, I've got to say, but I really do feel, you go out there on the shifts now and it's starting to feel different. And I think we've got to hold our nerve and hang in there.
Thank you, Chair. It's the public concerns, not only the public, but the Aneurin Bevan Health Board, about the increase in violence in A&E units, because a few members of the public have come to me and said that late at night they're actually afraid to go to A&E units, especially on weekends. Now, I have watched a few clips on the television over the last few days, and they have showed incidents there in A&E units, and not one clip have I ever seen a police officer.
I've seen those clips too, and I know they're looking for extra powers, aren't they, for some of the security guards. If they call us, we go. I think they actually said themselves that they don't always call us, because sometimes they don't always want a criminal outcome with some of those, particularly if they're patients and there's mental health issues. But if we do respond to the Royal Gwent a lot, particularly, Neville Hall, yes, and Astrid, but it tends, the main issue tends to be the Royal Gwent, and we've done a lot of work with them, but if they call us, we do go.
There'll be one more after me, but I'm just going to ask a question, and it's back to you raising money. Can I say that there's an awful lot of house building going on in Gwent, and there's a lot of house building going on in Newport area, which means that there's a lot of money taken in the police rates. And that's in there somewhere, but you know, that's been taken into consideration, and the amount of house building being a bit parochial in the Newport area is tremendous.
Yeah, I suppose it's twofold, that question. Yes, we build in the expectation that every year the council tax rate rises from the local authorities, and we build in an estimate. But also we're plugging into those development programmes around the infrastructure levy and Section 106 stuff around new infrastructure and estates create policing demand per se. So we've got pieces of work going through the force, looking where those strategic planning or strategic plans are going. So we're tapping in to ensure that the policing provision and the opportunity to draw down money from that is in our plans. So that's a double answer on that one. So yes and yes.
Right, on page 94, regarding the medium-term revenue projects, number 4, the dog section, and you're saying for 2021 you want to find a saving of 100k, and 2021-22 another 100k. Well, we only recently had a review, you know I'm going to nag about this, recent review of the department for the dog section, and it was found that we were underquartered by 2 officers, and 2 officers have just been assigned. So how are you forecasting a possible saving of 200,000 with the dog section going forward?
It goes back, these are suggested areas to look at. So what's come out, when we've compared Gwent to the average of our most similar forces, so other forces that share similar characteristics with us, Lancashire, Durham, South Wales, our dog section looks more expensive, just looks more expensive. but you'll appreciate the way the modelling is done, it works out the cost of your force per head of population. So if you've got a larger population, in theory, you can have a larger budget for that area. So it's just simple maths, really. So all that suggests is there may be an opportunity that you may be £200,000 more than the average of your force, but that might be compared to a far larger force with that can take advantage of economies of scale that we may not be able to. So that in no way is cast in stone. It is an area that independent data is kind of saying you're looking a bit out of kilter on that one. And again, I make that point, and it's at the point in time in 2021, we've pushed a lot of savings later into the MTFP to link in with if the funding formula bites at that point. So at this point in time, I would say that was intentional, but it wasn't. But thank you, Colin. Yeah. We're known for our humour as accountants. So these aren't any built-up business cases at this point in time. They're just an estimate. It provides me a degree of assurance that if I'm faced with a £10 million problem in 5 years' time, is that completely unachievable by putting precepts through the roof? Or are there other independent pieces of work saying there may be some savings that you haven't fully exploited yet? To the backdrop of 49 million, and that's what that is saying at this point in time.
That contradicts a review that's just been done, though, and taking on another 2 officers because we were under quota and they felt we needed, 2 more officers in there. So what you're saying is going against the report that's just been done?
The report would have been done locally, so it would have been a local piece of business change based on scientific fact in Gwent. So that's fine, and we hold to that at this point in time. When HMIC have taken our budgets, crunched them through a big sausage machine with lots of other forces, then put in the amount of population Gwent has to its other most similar forces, what pops out at the end is you look a bit expensive on the dog section. Thank you for that, but we've just been on a period of change and we've invested. So that isn't in any way cast in stone. Hence, I manage the MTFP on very much a risk basis. That I can't give any assurance these efficiencies will deliver on these particular ones. We may have to, we will have to change them as business cases evolve through the Staying Ahead 8 programme. So we've had the success of the Staying Ahead 8 programme, looking at both saving, but invest in areas of need, of which the dog section was one recently.
Okay, Peter?
Just following on that, Gwent Force may or may not be an anomaly, but I know that if you seize a dangerous dog, it goes to the police kennels, and it can be held in the police kennels for some considerable time. There was a case recently where a dog had been held by the police for 8 months because the owner was in custody, in Her Majesty's prison. That would add considerable cost and would not be losing people. It's just that the methods are different.
Just to clarify, we don't have police kennels in Gwent anymore. The kennels, our dogs, when actually they're looked after at home by the handlers, but if kennels are required, they go down to the South Wales. But we do acknowledge that potentially we would have to pay if a dangerous dog was seized, and it is very expensive if that does occur.
Before we recess, I think the Commissioner got to say what he wants, and then we'll go into recess. You just make a formal request of what you want from us for the precept.
Well, thank you. I formally request that you agreed to the proposal of 4.49% as the increase on the police precept for the next financial year.
We'll now, as a panel, go into recess and discuss what you've said to us, and we'll come back in after we've done due diligence. Okay. Okay, we have deliberated on your proposal, and we are going to veto the proposal. So we're going to do it the way.
You've got to propose a motion.
The motion that we are proposing is that the precept is going to be, from our point of view, from the panel, 3.99. Could I have a proposer? Well, I'll be the proposer.
Second, John.
Can we have a vote? All those in favour?
Okay, that's 9.
Those against?
That's carried.
Any abstentions? The reason why we veto the proposal is that we feel it is too high, and that is the reason why we veto the proposal of the precept. Okay.
I take it you will now write to me with that.
Yeah, there'll be a written report sent to you for your consultation. Okay, if we now move on to the agenda as set out. The first situation is item 4, which is the draft joint engagement and communication strategy 2018 to 2022, pages 9 to 26. I have the first question, which is on page... Pardon? Oh, right. Okay, just...
Well, thank you. Yes, it's true. You've seen what that joint strategy is to a significant extent in our discussion before the recess. We did talk about joint communications, how we get the message out across to people, and this is part of that in terms of joint work with my press people and the corporate communications team of the Chief Constable, and this seeks to outline how we will be working together to make sure that the key priorities are articulated to people, and that we do it in a proactive way that sends out good news stories, as well as some of the more traditional approaches. But happy for you to put questions to us, Chair.
Okay, the first question is relating to page 17, and it's referring to, it's the bottom of the page, and it's concerning the Gwent Now messaging service. My question is that the information, there doesn't seem to be a lot of information in respect of crime, and sometimes the information circulated seems to be not always applicable to the area which it goes to. I'm just wondering if there's going to be some development on that, in that it doesn't seem to be there doesn't seem to be a lot of information on there relating to specific areas, and having regard to the sometimes the request for information for crime, criminal activity.
I can cover that. There may be some options why certain people don't get information from certain areas, and part of it is how much of your personal information you put in when you sign up to Gwent Now. So I know that some people didn't want to put a lot of specific information about themselves and where they live on there, but that has resulted in them having information in relation to a number of areas, or Gwent-wide, rather than specifically related to where they live. So that's always something that's valuable to be aware of, but we can take it back, that we can say to put perhaps another general message out on Gwent Now, that if people want to go back to sign up for specific interests that they have and around specific areas, then we can make sure that that's done as well. But there are a number of questions, and I think you remember there was we had a part of one of our meetings we talked about when we moved from the OWL system to Gwent Now, and one of the things that people were concerned about was the number of questions they were asked that were quite specific around where they live and their sort of personal characteristics and personal circumstances. But what that was intended to do was make the information they ultimately receive more relevant to them. So we can have a look at that and take back as well and feed in that the right kind of information is getting out to everybody.
Can I say the last one, which was pretty good as far as I was aware, was you circulated a lot of information. There was about 5 headings really as to various scams, you know, which, you know, they're in various subdivisions. That was circulated the other day, but I don't see an awful lot of it really. Gillian?
Thank you, Chair. I'm only called Gillian when I've done something wrong by my mum. So Jill is fine. Page 18, Your Voice, you refer to the officers going out to the communities, and I guess they probably use tablets and capture information. But obviously a large part of the Your Voice survey is sent out electronically, it's published in the press and allow people to complete it themselves. So does this complement the work that the PCSOs are doing? And with a population of over 500,000, what sort of responses are you getting to Your Voice?
Yes, it does complement them. I was going to say, I might call you Gillian if I don't like the question, but no, this is fine. I'll ask ACC Kirk to comment on it, because much of this is operational, of course.
I'll have to go and find out on that specific. My understanding is it complements, so that there'd be the tablets where they're sort of going out and meeting people, and then there's also opportunities to do it online, but I don't know what the split is in terms of results, so I'll find out.
So it would be interesting to see, because if this is a big part of your engagement strategy, you've talked about 609 completing the financial one, and I get that people may not be quite so interested in that, but when it's actually asking you to determine what your priorities are, what are the problems in your area, you do quite a lot of publication around that, so it would be interesting to know what sort of responses you're getting, and again, is that representative of areas? You've talked about 8% only being a response in Blaenau Gwent on the finance area, but generally it was very much split across all of the other areas, and it would be interesting to see if that is represented in Your Voice as well, to know, is this still the right tool going forward? You've been using it for a couple of years. Is it still the right tool? And what are other authorities using? Are they using a similar tool?
Yeah, I'll bring in the Deputy Commissioner now, but these issues are kept under regular review, so make sure that we do have the best practical arrangements in terms of communications, but we'll take these points on board.
Thank you, Commissioner. I think the purpose in the strategy, which is currently in draft, because we very much wanted to have your contributions and your scrutiny on it before we finalise the document. The ambition of the document is to have a range of engagement opportunities, of which digital and Your Voice is one, but it is only one. So I think if we haven't got the balance right in terms of ensuring we've got face-to-face opportunities for people to meet, both members from the Police and Crime Commissioner's Office or people from Gwent Policing Services, then I think I would want to be drawing that out more. I think the other aspect is that we've just had a review of our digital engagement strategy, which will again be looking at how we engage through social media, through digital, including Your Voice. So the outcome of that piece of work will help determine really how we can complement and build on Your Voice going forward.
Can I just add, I think it'd be useful just for you to be aware that although this is a joint communications engagement strategy, there'll be separate action plans under each, one for our office and one for the police force. And what we can do as part of that is include things like the reviews of the way that which we're doing them and how we'll do things in future.
Thanks very much. You talked about how you capture feedback from the public, and obviously you do a lot of public events, maybe specific to specific areas, whether it be modern slavery or whatever. But are you able to capture any feedback from those events, which can be published through here as well?
Certainly, we try to be as proactive as we can in terms of using social media and the printed media. And we have fairly good relationships with the printed media. And certainly, as you say, we do a lot of public events, whether it's what you alluded to, the events of last year on modern slavery, and we've got more of those coming up, people trafficking, because both the Chief Constable and I have specific responsibilities on a Wales-wide basis, but on a whole range of issues as well, including community safety. And as I've alluded to earlier, I continue to carry out public surgeries where I will gather issues of local intelligence and use them in terms of my discussions with the Chief Constable, as well as trying to help people with particular problems. And yes, they are covered by Twitter and a range of other social media outlets.
Just to add on to that, we've recently purchased crowd control. And in terms of social media, that's going to give us really detailed analytics about who we've reached, how many people have retweeted or followed on Facebook. And my understanding is that will also give us an idea of demographics and age, which will also allow us to know whether we've reached target audiences.
Indeed, on page 21, it's the third heading, media coverage. There is information there about how we go about that.
Sorry, I was just going to add, the other thing that we've been talking about just this week within the office is using the information that comes through the public response unit, particularly from the surgeries that the Commissioner holds, and we link that into the communications and engagement element of what we do, because many things that start off as low-level concerns, not quite at the level of complaints, are really originate as requests for information. So if we can get messages out to the public, frequently ask questions and make sure that those answers are available, there may be certain things that we sort of head off and can sort of increase satisfaction in the service received, rather than them eventually turning into complaints.
Thanks very much. My final question then is around the grant scheme. So you're obviously getting performance information back and about how the grants you're using are working in the area. You were proposing a change to the grant scheme going forward. Are you still going to be able to capture information from that going forward?
Yes, you're talking particularly about the partnership fund there, which we renamed the Police Community Fund. And there are other grants that we pay out quite separately from that, which maybe Darren can comment upon. But yes, when the neighbourhood teams go out now from the first, well, they'll be starting very, very soon in readiness for the next financial year when the new scheme comes into force. Certainly, they will be establishing good communication links with the sponsors of those schemes. There will be regular assessments as to how the money that is allocated to a particular project is being used, and that will be gathered, and certainly we will make that, in the examples going forward of good practice or where things aren't quite so good, that will become known, yes.
I just want to come back to the senior citizen situation, and the thing with scams is that a lot of people of a certain age, I think it's the age group from 70 to 75 seem to be the ones really being hit by scams, and it's all about making contact with them. Not all of them sort of locked into the social media, but a chief inspector at our council made some observations that he was doing a piece of work on this really, but it's all about communication, whether in fact everyone can be communicated. I think we all realise I'm not saying that senior citizens are not on the social network, but sometimes it needs to be reinforced that they probably at risk. They're the ones probably got more than money to be taken from them.
Yes, I agree. In terms of demographics, it's probably older people who are at greater risk of scams. There are a number of issues for this. We have a scheme called POET, Protecting Our Elderly Together. We know that it's not a question of falling for the scams, but very often older people who are lonely, and there is a correlation between loneliness and falling for or being drawn into scams, that older people will tend to be more at risk than younger demographics. Certainly, how we educate people to avoid being scammed in the first place, we invest quite a bit in that. Get Safe Online, Gwent, it does a lot of work in that direction, but it's something you're quite right. We have to look at how we get that message across. Not everyone's on social media, I accept that. So we have to look at other ways, whether that's in terms of warnings through the media, working certainly with older people's groups to help get the message across. For example, I attend the 50-plus forums on the various local authorities, and that's a message we try to get across to their members, but we recognise, and it's a problem that's not just for policing, very much local authorities, the third sector, the health board indeed needs to work with us in helping to get that message across, or how not to fall for these things, what to look out for, and how not to fall for these things in the first place. But that is ongoing work.
Mike, next question. Tony.
Thanks, Chair. I note in the report that you've acknowledged the work done in Warwickshire. I was wondering whether there is learning out there from various other areas as to what sort of response they get, whether it's better, whether it's worse, and whether we can do anything differently.
Yes, look, I mean, unashamedly, we will pinch ideas, good ideas from other parts of the country who've tried things, and I don't see any point in trying to reinvent the wheel. Particular gratitude to Warwickshire in this case, because a lot of this is based on what's proven successful there. But certainly through the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners, one of the themes and links is about communication, broadly speaking, and we do get good feedback, and we will feed into them as well. So we will learn from each other, yes.
Thanks for that. The other one is a general question, really, on the reports. Looking for recognition of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. I don't know if it's one for Sean or whether you, Commissioner, as an ex-minister in the Welsh Government, that realising that policing is not devolved at the moment. But of course, as you've pointed out quite rightly, we work with most of the other bodies which are in fact devolved, and obviously the work done with policing must have a big impact on the sort of areas that are mentioned in that Act, whether we should be recognising that in reports going ahead.
Yeah, I think as the report says, it is sort of interdependent on a number of other acts, and one is the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. We have an engagement officer within our office who attends the PSB engagement, some of the PSB engagement groups where they exist within the local authorities, and we very much plan on using this to work together with other organisations to carry out this work.
Sorry, if I can just add to that answer. On page 16, we do refer to the Act, but again, it's probably not brought out to its full, to give it its full prominence, and I think it should feature very clearly at the beginning of the document in terms of our work. I don't think it's helpful that we've got it as in abbreviation, not in full, so I think there's...
It's already mentioned earlier on.
But I think there's an opportunity very much to ensure that that our engagement work is delivering our contribution to the Act, but also to avoid duplication. So I think that very much is around how we work with the engagement opportunities that our local authorities are doing and our other partners, and ensure that we are able to respond to members of the public consistently.
Yeah, we also engage, obviously we engage with all 5 PSBs in Gwent, and also now with the G9, which used to be the G7, but now with Fire and Rescue and my office added, it's now G9, so which looks at coordinating things on a pan-Gwent basis. But you're absolutely right, we need to make sure that our contribution, and it is a contribution as opposed to our responsibility, is clearly stated within all materials issued by the public service boards.
Thanks for that. What I had in mind was maybe a specific paragraph, as appears in other places, to recognise and say how that contribution is made. Thank you.
Can we now move on to the item 5, which is the Police and Crime Commissioner's Performance Monitoring Process. That's pages 27 to 54. The first question on my list is Stuart, question on performance.
Please?
Yeah? 101. 101.
And the public concerns regarding the response or the lack of response, that they have to wait on the telephone to get a reply. And once they do get a reply on the telephone, the time they got to wait then for an officer to get to the incident. Could we have your comments on that, please?
Let me just make a point. Before we turn to that specific point, Chair, can I just point out that what you've had before you to read is a substantial document, getting on for 30 pages. We won't be repeating that on each occasion, you'll probably be pleased to know, but I regard this with a lot of work has gone into this from the Gwent Police. You will see when you read the whole document that at the end we've got further questions. That is my office of further questions that we'll be putting to the Chief Constable. And it's those sort of questions and the responses that will inform future reports to you. So you might end up next time with a document maybe no more than 4 pages in length, which will have the key priorities and the various yardsticks that we're using to measure progress or not, as the case may be. Just to give a bit of background, there are significant changes that are also impacting upon policing now and well-being. In addition to the changed format to the way you scrutinise me about how I in turn am scrutinising the Chief Constable, Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services, that bit doesn't apply to Wales, the last bit, but they're now changing the way in which they'll be inspecting police forces through what's called force management statements, which is a similar type of approach to what we're seeking to do here. And also the way in which I hold the Chief Constable to account in public, which is the Strategy and Performance Board. We will be seeking to align the Chief Constable's information so that these 3 separate types of reporting mechanisms can be as similar as possible in their approach to avoid unnecessary duplication and unnecessary work, and they will complement each other. In terms of your specific question now on 101, it's often raised, nowhere near as much as it used to be raised, I have to say. The average waiting time currently, I believe, is under 2 minutes. That's an average, of course. And it's very important, however, that you as a local representative, and for now a member of, or currently a member of this panel, where you know of deficiencies, that you raise it. And if possible, if I'm able to have, not at this moment, but if you're able to send me specific examples of cases where the response was either far too long than was acceptable, and then the nature of it, if it was when a response was made, it wasn't appropriate. I'd be very grateful for those details. But if I could ask Sean now to expand a bit, and perhaps ACC Kirk as well from the operational side.
Thank you. Certainly, as you all know, you've had some presentations in relation to the Force Control Room in 101. As part of the monitoring, as well as the regular performance monitoring that comes through sort of in written format through to our office, the Deputy Commissioner and I have been meeting regularly with the Superintendent in charge of the Force Control Room and receiving regular updates in relation to performance. We have seen, as the Commissioner said, a lot of improvements. We've also seen a decrease in the number of complaints coming through to our office in relation to 101. But when they do come in, we have been able to take them, because they're quite small in number, we have been able to look into them specifically and find out what was going on at that time. So certainly the ones, I can give a couple of examples of technical difficulties that were later resolved, or also quite a major incident that involved a lot of 999 calls where the demand was taken away from the 101 service. And I know those of you who attended the visit saw how that can happen on occasion. So, but we, as the Commissioner said, we do appreciate being told about any of those incidents that do occasionally still occur, because we can look into them and respond directly.
The only follow-up bit was around then the speed of response once something's been reported. That will have been done prioritised on threat, harm and risk. And by its very nature, 101 is a non-emergency number. So quite often those visits then are diarised. And so it's sorted out with the person calling when's going to be convenient. So again, I'd reiterate, if you have something specific that is a specific incident, then I'd be really interested to hear about it via the channels, because then we can look into that specific incident.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Tony?
Thank you, Chair. My question relates around the item tackling antisocial behaviour on page 45, particularly 5.1, where there's been, in Cumberland Town Centre, there's been a development of using security teams to carry out certain police work. And at what level do you feel, or what level do you see this going in terms of a private police force, for example? Would this be a trend? Because these people, or whoever they are, have been trained for taking names and addresses of individuals as if they're found to be committing an offence. Who decides whether an offence has been committed? I thought that would have been a police responsibility. I'm a little concerned that if this rolls out to a greater extent, it could create a this and us situation between the police, the public, and what the responsibilities either each and or are. A little concerned in that it seems to be driving towards a private police force in some respects, taking some work off the police, but putting it in the hands of people who are not fully trained, but not fully trained in the police concept of policing.
Well, generally, certainly, I'll ask Sean and ACC Kirk if they wish to make further comments. There's no question of moving towards private police forces. As you'll see in there, the training for what they are able to do and can be authorised to do is provided by Gwent Police, so it will be limited. In a sense, you can say this is part of partnership working. We talked earlier today in terms of the precept about the need for resources, more resources. So sometimes we have to try and share the burden and responsibility for things, but there are limits, of course, to that. Sean?
Yeah, I was just going to add that this report would ordinarily go to the Strategy and Performance Board, where the Commissioner holds the Chief Constable to account. Right. Because of the timing of this meeting, we haven't had a board prior to you seeing this report. So the sort of questions that you're raising are the type of questions we would ask the Chief Constable to answer, particularly around impacts and outcomes in relation to this and how well or otherwise it may be working. And those are the type of things that would be the next step. So I think you see at the end of the document, we've asked a number of questions, some examples. Obviously, in a meeting arrangement, more could come up at that meeting. But we would be publishing any responses to those sort of scrutiny questions that we're asking as a result.
Could I come back with a general comment, not about that, but about policing in Newport? We call it East, LDP, you call it East? Whatever it is. It seems to me from reading the reports that Monmouthshire is a very safe part of the county because there are very little mentioned about Monmouthshire in here. And this is the matter which is raised within Monmouthshire's councils across the piece, that we don't seem to be getting the policing that we need there because it is being sucked into Newport because of the problems you do have in Newport. It was raised particularly at a council area committee meeting only the beginning of this week, and I think they were going to ask the Police and Crime Commissioner possibly to come and address them. I don't know, that's up to the chairman. But how can we ensure that our policing in Monmouthshire isn't sucked into Newport, which it tends to be at the case at the moment?
Yes, I will obviously ask. That's an operational matter because the deployment of resources is a matter for the Chief Constable and the Chief Officer team. Just in terms of your point, I don't think I've received an invitation to come. But let me just say, I'm very willing to go to any of these bodies to explain my role and to hear what people have to say and to use that information appropriately.
We can certainly look to address the balance in the report, because I know myself that there's been spectre burglaries in Caldecott, and so there is stuff that could go in here, and we need to make sure that it is balanced across the piece. In terms of policing, when it comes to the emergency response and those cars that you see with the blue lights, they will go where the demand is. So if there is less in Monmouthshire at a particular time, that is the way that is, because that's how they're deployed. When it comes to the neighbourhood teams, that is spread equally across the whole force area, and we're deeply committed to that. So there is almost the two balances, and when it comes to the specialist teams then looking at drugs or more serious and organised crime, again, that is looked at across the whole force area, so I can give you reassurance on that.
I'd like to come back slightly on that then. Yes, in Caldecott, as I know where you're from, we've got a police station which we don't have access. We do have access to if we go and ring the bell if we know they're there, and we can talk to our PCSOs and our sergeant. We do have a Monday morning session in the hub in the library in Caldecott where the PCSO goes there for a few hours. But it's the visibility, as you say, about the response teams. They come from Chepstow and they fly through Caldecott. But what the people are saying is, as gentlemen from Council from Torvine, is we don't see the policemen on the beat. And I know there's a level of sickness in Caldecott, which in the police station in Caldecott, which is stopping you doing that. But it's when you read the reports, there is no real, I would say emphasis should be on Monmouthshire, but there's no emphasis there that there is a problem in Monmouthshire that you're addressing. Are we missing it? There's a lot of rural crime, and as you say, there's a lot of burglaries through house burglaries, there's a lot of drugs, but we don't seem to be getting on top of them. But in percentage terms, compared to Newport, they're very little.
And I take that point, we need to get the balance of the reporting right. The truth with our drugs picture is a lot of the supply is coming from Newport into those very areas you speak. So we are trying to get to the root cause. Yeah, and elsewhere in the country. So we are trying to get to that root cause. In terms of your earlier point around working together with shopkeepers, security guards, this is trying something new, and some of your concerns I share, and we've got to get the balance right, but we have got to try and work differently. So we're working our way through all of that, but your concerns are the sorts of questions that I would be asking as well.
Question I've got on page 41, 3.2, monitoring dangerous offenders regarding the sex offenders managed in the community. What I'd like to know regarding these figures, it says it's because of Pollet that these figures are composed, but how much of that is down to the undercover work that general public are doing with their decoys and are catching these criminals as well? And it'd be nice to know what the figure is, if it's all, because the way it's presented by you is the Pollet is the one that's catching them. When we've got, I know several that have been caught now in Gwent in the last few months through the ones that's doing the, behind the scenes online work, investigating, bringing the evidence forward and catching, passing the information to the police. So I wonder what the balance is there.
I'm not able to answer that question specifically, but you're referring to the paedophile hunters, the various groups. And ironically, Rhiannon and I have been doing a fair bit of work on this. There is a shift in terms of the national mood. Chief Constable Simon Bailey, isn't it? Yeah, who leads for the National Police Chiefs Council, was at one point very much resolute that these groups shouldn't be doing this. That is still the view, but there is now a recognition that they're going to. And so my view certainly is we do need to see, and not just on a Gwent basis, but how this work can be properly done so that the work that they do is done in a legal framework, it's done safely, and evidence is gathered that will stand up to scrutiny in any court and in any prosecution case. I've been to the Pollitt team, and it's extremely impressive what with the resources that they have and the technology that they use, how they are able to enforce arrests. And what we don't want to happen is, if you like, well-meaning groups, if they don't have the sort of right package of support around them, the danger of corrupting evidence and people who are perpetrators not getting successfully prosecuted. So there is a balance to be struck here, but I understand the point that you're making, and we're looking to go forward in a planned but legal way on this. Now, I don't know if ACC Kirk wants to add anything to that.
The Pollitt team, a lot of those sex offenders managed in the community, that will be about sharing indecent images. So that's mainly what the Pollitt team look at. People sending photos to each other that are of indecent or of children. The chat room offences and actually trying to meet children as a sex offender is more what the paedophile hunters are looking at. Our national stance is still, for many reasons, around safeguarding, around people's own welfare, about being on these chat rooms, around the dangers of the evidence, is we wish they wouldn't do it. And if they are going to do it, there are certain responsibilities that they have, which, if they step over the line, could be criminal offences that they're committing themselves. They can't be sharing indecent images either, and they can't trap somebody, in layman's terms, into committing offences. So there's lots of concerns. It's very, very complex. But yes, nationally, we are looking at a way forward, because it's a big, complex issue for us. Nationally, the technology companies themselves, who are making lots of money out of their platforms, have a responsibility, in my view, to clamp down on some of this themselves. The proportion, therefore, of those types of offences, we do that too in the police. We have undercover units that are also doing that in a very, very controlled way. The proportion is tiny of the paedophile hunter stings. They are in there, but the proportion is tiny. The vast increase is about people sharing indecent images, not actually going to meet children. Does that? Yeah.
I'm just wondering what the proportionality were, because we've seen it all the time now. You know, the live stings, you can see sometimes 2 or 3 stings going on per day. You can, that's not in Gwent, that's UK-wide. And that's why I was wondering if, where the graph of all of a sudden shot up, is it because of these paedophile hunters that we are seeing all the time? That's why I wanted the comparison on that. Thanks.
It's the sharing of the pictures, and my view, that's getting in early.
Jill and then Bill.
Thank you very much. Provision of the information you've given us is really interesting. However, I don't actually think it's really suitable for the needs of our panel. It's extremely detailed, and as we can see, what's happening is people automatically are drilling it into the detail. It's a strategic board. We shouldn't be seeing the detail of how crime is going up month on month. We should be looking at broad categories over the various years, because the fact that crime has gone up between October and November probably is quite possibly the norm. It's leading up to Christmas. The darker nights are coming, bonfire night, ASBs. Perhaps that is the norm. But I think from whilst it's very interesting, I think going forward, it's not going to be suitable for ours. But I understand where you're showing that it's going to move forward. I mean, as a panel member, I provided information and feedback. As a panel, you're telling us you're holding the chief officer to account. But if we don't see the sort of information that's supporting your aims, that's not going to allow us to challenge you as the PCC to say you're delivering on those aims. But also, if we challenge you, that enables us to support your performance to the public. So when you're coming to us and asking for a precept increase, we're able to evidence that the performance is there, the fact that you do need more money, and they're the reasons why. So given the annual plan for your first year, we've obviously produced an annual plan which covered previous. Given your annual plan will shortly be produced, can you advise me on the challenges and reasons which are in a position whereby nearly a year later we still don't have sort of any baseline as to how your aims are going to be evidenced and how we're going to take that forward, please.
Yes, well, thank you. And I said in response to the first question, this is a very significant, substantial document. A lot of work has gone into it. I didn't want to, and I take your point about the information that you need to see reasonably, both comprehensive but reasonably brief and focused to the point in terms of the priorities and how we can measure progress or not, as the case may be, against those key priorities. That is what we're going to do, certainly going forward. I'm viewing this as the baseline document. This is where we're at the moment. And as you can see at the end of the document, we have detailed the questions, some standard, some specific to this, that we're now going to go back to the Chief Constable with through the Strategy and Performance Board. And it is that type of approach that will be that will lead to the basis of future submissions to yourselves. Because I want to be clear. I don't want anything sort of to be confusing. I want you to be able to perform your functions of scrutinising the way in which I am holding the Chief Constable to account. And if there's any concern or ambiguity about that, I'm glad to hear what you have to say. And certainly we'll be going back. We'll look at this now in terms of how we need to change this so that the type of request that you've just made, the information that you want, will be clear and forthcoming. I think this is a lot of work, as I say, has gone into this. It's a good start. There's going to be new reporting systems, both to the Strategy and Performance Board and to Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary. I want those to gel together as much as possible, but certainly the focus for yourselves has to be on the information that I can provide you to enable you to hold me to account, and that's what the focus will be.
So can you explain then why, having raised a year ago, what the challenges have been in actually delivering? We provided feedback to say for each aim, what's the baseline? How are you going to collect it? Mm-hmm. Why we're still in this position? And will it actually be addressed for the annual plan that we're able to say? And I have no doubt that in some cases, we won't have the information. It's probably going to be a new aim that's specifically your aim that maybe we have to collect data on. But if we've missed a year of collecting that data, in a year or two's time, we need to be in a position to evidence a baseline so we can show the performance is there. Some of the aims are very similar or lead on from the previous commissioner when it talks about people feeling safe and feeling that crime are dealt with. So that information is inevitably already being collected. We've seen it's being collected. But I think for your annual plan, we need to be in a position by when we get to that point, the information and the issues we've been talking about over the last year are now being addressed. And as a panel, we are seeing where we are at the end of that first year.
Yes, look, the last thing I want to do is to present any excuses. I don't think that would be reasonable or fair. There has been difficulties in how we actually assess some of the key priorities. For example, people feel safe in Gwent. How are we assessing that? We need to look more closely at the mechanisms that we've got there. All I can do is apologise that we are a bit behind on our time frames. We had wanted this to be cleared up by now, so we've given you this information. All I can assure you on is that we will be addressing this as a matter of great urgency. Now, I don't know if any of my colleagues want to add anything at this point.
Okay, thank you. I look forward to being seen in the
Yeah.
plan.
Commissioner, page 35, item 1.1, crimes and robberies. As you can see, there was a group of males who were using violence, brandishing knives to take items such as mobile phones and cash. I hope you would agree with me that I'm pleased to see that the senior management team in an operation have now apprehended 6 males or individuals, as they're called here, on suspicion of the above offences. However, we're on about making people feel safe in Gwent. So people who were arrested for violence and robbery and brandishing knives around were arrested by the police and then duly bailed. what can we do jointly together to ensure that those people who commit or allegedly have committed these offences of such a serious nature are not merely just arrested and then turned back out into the communities that they've committed these offences into? How can we have influence on ensuring these people are kept off the street until matters are resolved otherwise?
As it states there, the investigation is ongoing. Not much more I can add there. Obviously, the police have to work within the rules that are set down. No one, as far as I'm aware, unless it's happened very recently, has actually been convicted of anything. But as this is an operational matter, can I ask the Assistant Chief Constable to comment?
Yeah, it's to follow on from that, really. They've been arrested, but the investigation's still ongoing, so they haven't actually been charged. It's only at the point of charge that we can ever oppose being granted bail. So it's out of our hands. Until we actually charge someone and have sufficient evidence to charge, you can't remand anyone in custody pending a court case.
I understand that. I'm just disappointed in it because we work hard to try and ensure collectively, together, Commissioner, with you, to try and ensure the feeling of safety within Gwent. And this does nothing to ensure the safety of the people within Gwent. It's not a criticism of the police, it's not a criticism of yourself or any other member of this panel. It's a reality that we have to deal with, and these individuals are undermining the whole situation.
Can I say, look, I understand that point absolutely. Incidents like this will only add to the fear of crime, and that's something that we are certainly wanted to tackle. It would, on the face of it, make life difficult when a key priority is to establish people feeling safer in Gwent. I appreciate the point that you're making, but ultimately, of course, we can only work within the law and the procedures that apply.
Can I just refer to page 52 and 53, and I think the panel in agreement about these various questions to be raised at a later time. But can I also mention the fact that one thing which does concern me is in the process of inquiry, a lot of people get cautioned. There was an article some time ago which was in the Times about comparing cautions all over the country. The caution system was brought about as a result of giving a person a chance when they stepped over the line, which could apply to just about everyone. But I know that there's lots of things now that got to be taken in consideration with younger people and trying to change their ways and everything. But I just wondering is if the situation is being monitored, because sometimes it could be sort of an easy way of determining things, from the point of view of, I think the magistrates at one time were concerned about the amount of cases were coming before them, but things have changed immensely now in all sorts of ways. We're dealing in a very complex society. But I'm just concerned that are you monitoring the process whereby people are cautioned?
Yeah. I know this, sorry.
I do. Yes, I will invite Sean to come in on the specific issue of cautioning. That's important. It's a matter that's been raised here by this panel before. But, the other points that you made about other alternative ways of avoiding perhaps people going to court, and we do have a number of diversionary activity schemes, especially for young people who are in danger or have just come into the criminal justice system, and certainly in terms of women's pathfinders, so women who find themselves really, because of circumstances, the wrong side of the law. What can we do? We don't want to necessarily send people to prison if there are better ways of making them good citizens. And we do invest a lot in that. We have positive futures, for example, for young people that will work with those young people, and that's one of the reasons why I'm changing the nature of the former partnership fund in terms of a community fund, so that we can work with groups that will help to stop young people getting into the wrong side of the law to start with. And it's all very much part of the crime prevention, crime reduction strand of our police and crime plan. But on the particular issue of cautions.
Yes, because it had been raised at the panel meeting, that's specifically why outcomes following investigation was requested as part of the report to the Commissioner on this occasion. And I think the Chief Constable said last time that the use of cautions in that way is not something that he recognised in Gwent. I think it shows here that the 5 most commonly used outcomes are listed and cautions aren't included there, but that account for 3% of the total. So we have asked that is continually monitored, but as far as the frequent use rather than alternative outcomes, that's not an issue that seems to be specific to Gwent at the moment, and hopefully is elsewhere rather than here.
The main reason that I raise it is that the police commissioner in the Metropolitan Police area brought it, well, it was something that she brought forward. You know, there was concern, obviously, you know, this is a different force and the Mets is a different force, but she certainly was concerned about it and about the fact that certain persons weren't being dealt with as they should. There we go.
Yeah, no, absolutely right, although Cressida Dix, who's the Met Commissioner, is not the same as myself. Its title may sound similar, but it's she is the equivalent of the Chief Constable for London. Yeah.
Page 33, I read that a rise of 121 crimes in the East LPA in the year is described as a slightly larger increase. I wondered about the word slightly, but there we are. But going on to 35, it's this issue about violence against a person without injury, and again I read that it's possible that the upper control limit figure will be breached. I mean, is this about recording or is it about some other issues?
Yeah, certainly bringing the Assistant Chief Constable on this, but there is part of the increases in crime, and this applies to the national figures, part of it is down undoubtedly to better reporting, more ethical reporting, which is a good thing, is that people feel more able to come forward to report crimes, and that is part of it. By no means is it the full picture, and we wouldn't suggest otherwise. But if I ask the Assistant Chief Constable.
Yeah, it's a mixture. So some of it is about recording, and some offences that previously would have been antisocial behaviour and not classed as crimes are now crimes. So it's not new things happening, it's how they're recorded. And a vast amount of this is around offences online. So it's where violence without injury brings in harassment, because that's felt as violence, stalking and harassment. And so some of the cyber bullying we would now record, and it would come under here.
Another one, Chair, is page 42, the prevent activity. That's had some sort of quite adverse publicity recently, and say hindsight is a wonderful thing, with this particular incident that you described where the wrong young person was arrested is obviously, I imagine, quite traumatic for that particular individual, and hopefully that sort of thing doesn't happen too often, because that is a very sort of bad news that sort of spreads and actually discredits the scheme. But there seems to be a wider issue there, and I don't know whether the ACC can comment on that. I mean, it may well be that the prevent scheme is far more active in some areas rather than ours, but there does seem to be a lot of disquiet about some of the things that are going on within that scheme.
On the particular example that you mentioned, certainly I let the ACC say whatever she's able to say. I suppose, yeah, look, there is an element of risk in all this, but I think we're better placed to take action under prevent. Occasionally, of course, there will be mistakes made. Of course there will. And then we'll look to learn what went wrong. But I'd rather see action taken than an overcautious approach and us miss something. There is enormous disruption to potential terrorist act through this sort of intelligence work. Can I say that the situation in Wales, I know what you mean, there is a lot of concern about how Prevent is working, particularly in England, but in Wales we do embed the officers who are attached to Prevent within the local communities, and hopefully we do have that good community relationship that aids not only in the gathering of intelligence but also in understanding about what we want to do. Now, I don't have specific knowledge about the actual incident. I don't know if you're able to comment on it. No. No.
This young lad who got involved in a bit of a terrorist thing in Newport, I presume it's Newport, sorry, may not have been. What were the outcomes of that for the force in the future? Because it's an odd, it's under good practice on page 42. He's arrested in relation to a terrorist attack plan. Obviously, I don't know how old he was or what the circumstances were, but how did this impact on the officers dealing with that case? Or can you talk about it?
I think this was kept, although it was added in, a conversation with the force was kept deliberately vague for the public domain. So I don't think a conversation more widely would be appropriate in a public forum. But it is the sort of thing that we could discuss amongst, within our back at the, headquarters in relation to any lessons learned.
Okay, we've exhausted questions on that. We now move on to the forward work programme.
Thank you, Chair. I just bring to members' attention the next meeting of the panel is planned is the 16th of March. We've got the wellbeing strategy plan for that. It's got the dates of future meetings going forward up until December. Obviously, we'll be liaising with the Commissioner's Office now to start populating now. There'll be things like we normally have, like the budget, treasury management, etc., the annual plan, report, etc. I'm just happy if members are happy for me to liaise with the office and to populate that going forward and to circulate that to members.
Everyone happy with that? Yep. Okay. Go.
Kath, could we just clarify in terms of the wellbeing strategy that this will pick up the details of officer sickness, absence due to stress over the period of time as well? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your attendance, and wish you well, safe journey home. And I think we've dealt with all matters in a reasonable and professional manner. Thank you.